Before I tell you this story, I need to ask you something, dear. If you have made it this far, if this thumbnail caught your eye, then I want you to do 3 little things for me before we begin. Press that like button right now. It truly does help an old woman's story reach more hearts. Then hit subscribe, because I have many more stories like this one to share with you. Stories about faith, about family, about the things we do not talk about at the supper table. And last, I want you to leave me a comment down below and tell me where in this wide world you are watching from. I read every single one, dear. Every single one. And it warms this old heart of mine to know how far these words travel. Now, come sit with me a while, because I have waited 62 years to tell this story the way it truly happened, and not the way the elders wanted it told. My name is Ruth. I was born in the autumn of 1944, on a farm outside of a small settlement in Holmes County, Ohio, the kind of place where the roads are still gravel in some parts, and the loudest sound on a summer evening is the creak of a porch swing and the clip-clop of a horse coming home. I am 81 years old now, though my hands don't always agree with that number when I am kneading bread or mending a quilt. My joints ache in ways they did not used to, and my eyesight is not what it once was, but my mind, dear, my mind remembers everything. It remembers the smell of my mother's kitchen, the sound of my father's boots on the wooden floor, and it remembers the day he sat me down at that same kitchen table and told me who I was going to marry. I was 17 years old. I did not choose the boy. I did not choose the day. And I certainly did not choose the fact that the boy my father had chosen for me was my own first cousin. A boy I had known since we were both small enough to be carried on our mother's hips at church gatherings. A boy I had played with in the hay barn. A boy whose mother and my mother were sisters, born of the same womb, raised in the same farmhouse 2 miles down the road from ours. I want to tell you this story slowly, because it is not a story that can be rushed. It took me 62 years to understand it myself, and even now, some parts of it still catch in my throat like a bone in a fish. But I promised myself that before I go to be with the Lord, I would tell somebody the truth of it. The whole truth. Not the version we tell at quiltings and canning bees. Not the version that makes it sound like a sweet old-fashioned love story. The real one. The one with the tears in it. And the anger. And yes, in the end, something that I suppose you could call love, though it did not look like any love I had imagined as a young girl. So let me start at the beginning, because you cannot understand the marriage without understanding the family, and you cannot understand the family without understanding the kind of life we lived, back before the world outside our fences had ever heard the word Amish without picturing a buggy on a postcard. I was the 4th of 9 children. My father, Amos, was a stern man, not cruel exactly, not in the way the world today might use that word, but stern in the old way, the way a fence post is stern, the way winter is stern. He believed in order. He believed that a farm without order would fall to ruin, that a family without order would fall to sin, and that a community without order would fall to the pride and foolishness of the English world, which is what we called anyone who was not Amish. My mother, Fanny, was a quiet woman, gentle in her manner but iron underneath, the way so many of our mothers were. She raised us on scripture and hard work, and the kind of love that did not say the word love very often, but showed itself in 1,000 small ways. An extra spoon of apple butter on your bread, a hand smoothing your hair back before bed, a hymn hummed low while she worked the butter churn. We rose before the sun. Always, There is no Amish farm I have ever known where the rooster gets up before the family does. By the time that bird was crowing, my brothers were already out doing the milking, and I was in the kitchen with my mother and my older sisters, starting the biscuits, frying the eggs, setting the long wooden table for 11 people, because with 9 children and 2 parents, our table was never quiet and never empty. Our farm sat on 62 acres, mostly corn and hay, with a dairy herd that my father was quite proud of, though pride was a word we were not supposed to use, so he called it satisfaction instead. We had no electricity running to the house, of course. No telephone in those days, though some of the more progressive families in nearby districts had begun to allow a phone shanty out by the road. We had no automobile. We had our buggy, and our horses, and our own 2 feet, and that was how we understood distance, not in miles, but in how long the walk was, how long the drive was, how far a person could get before supper needed to be on the table. I tell you all this not to make you pity us, or to make you think our life was some kind of grim prison, because it was not. There was more laughter in that farmhouse than you might imagine, dear. There was singing in German at the table. There was the smell of cinnamon rolls on a Saturday morning. There was the joy of a barn raising when the whole community came together and the men built a structure in a single day while the women laid out enough food to feed an army. There was courting, and there was teasing between siblings, and there was a kind of deep-rooted belonging that I have never found anywhere else in this world, not even after I left for a time, which I will tell you about later. But there was also this. There was the understanding, never spoken aloud but felt in every bone of your body from the time you were old enough to understand anything at all, that your life was not entirely your own, that your father's word was law in that house, under God, and that a daughter's greatest duty, greater even than obedience to the church, was obedience to her father until the day she married, and obedience to her husband after. I did not question this as a small child. Why would I? It was simply the water I swam in, same as every other Amish girl in our district. I watched my older sisters, Katie and Miriam, grow up, get baptized into the church at 18, and then be courted, quietly, properly, by young men our father approved of, men from good families, men who worked hard and did not drink and went to church every other Sunday, same as we did. Katie married a boy named Levi who ran a harness shop. Miriam married into a family that raised standard-bred horses 2 districts over. Both of those marriages were, by our community's standards, good matches, respectable matches, matches that my father had a great deal of say in, though the story told publicly was always that the young couple had found each other through the natural courting rituals of youth group singings and buggy rides home in the dark. I believed, for most of my childhood, that this was how it would go for me too. I believed I would grow up, get baptized, and some quiet, decent boy from a good family would begin driving me home from the Sunday evening singings, and in time we would marry, and I would have my own farmhouse kitchen, and my own long wooden table, and my own 9 children, God willing, and that would be my life, same as it had been my mother's life, and her mother's before her. What I did not understand as a small girl playing in the hay barn with my cousin Eli was that our fathers had another plan entirely. One that had been forming for years. One that had far less to do with love or courtship or the natural order of youth group singings, and far more to do with land and debt and the tangled, complicated ties between 2 farming families who happened to be bound together not only by marriage, but by blood. I need you to understand something about my father's family and my mother's family both, because it matters for what comes later. My father, Amos, had married my mother Fanny, but my mother had a sister, Salome, who married a man named Jonas. Jonas and my father were, as it turned out, not just brothers-in-law through this marriage, but had grown up together, had farmed adjoining land as young men, had gone through their own Rumspringer together, had been baptized in the same church service. They were as close as brothers long before they became brothers by marriage. And Jonas and Salome's oldest son was a boy named Eli. Eli was 6 months older than me. We had grown up practically as siblings, running between the two farms, which sat only 2 miles apart by the road, but far less than that if you cut across the Yoder's back pasture and through the little stand of woods that separated our two properties. I remember catching frogs with Eli down by the creek when I was maybe 7 years old. I remember him teaching me to whistle through a blade of grass held between my thumbs. I remember him getting in trouble for putting a garter snake in his sister's lunch pail and blaming it on me, and me being furious about it for a solid week. He was, in every way that mattered to a child's understanding of the world, my cousin, my friend, and absolutely nothing more than that. The idea that he might one day be my husband would have struck me. At 10 years old, at 12 years old, even at 15 years old, as something between a joke and a horror. Cousins did not marry cousins in my understanding of the world. Not the way we understood things. Not in the modern telling of our own community's rules, even though I would later learn that first cousin marriages, while increasingly discouraged and in many districts formally forbidden by that time, were not entirely unheard of in the older generations, particularly in situations where land and family alliance made such a match desirable to the fathers involved. That is the part of this story I need you to sit with for a moment. This was not simply an old-fashioned arranged marriage of the kind you might read about in a novel, a stern father picking a suitable young man from the community. This was my father and his brother-in-law and lifelong friend, deciding between themselves, over the course of years I would later learn, that our two families' lands should be joined, that the debts my Uncle Jonas had quietly accumulated after a difficult decade of poor harvests and a barn fire that took 2 of his best horses, should be resolved not through a public reckoning that would shame him before the whole church district, but through a marriage that would merge our 2 farms into one operation under my father's more capable management, with Eli as the son who would eventually inherit and run it, and me as the daughter who would make that inheritance possible by becoming his wife. I did not know any of this at 17. I only knew that one evening in late October after the supper dishes were cleared and my younger siblings had been sent up to bed. My father asked me to stay at the table. My mother stayed too, though she kept her eyes down on her hands, which I would come to understand later was not disinterest but something closer to grief, that she did not have the power to change what was about to happen. My father folded his hands on the table the way he did before a prayer, but this was no prayer. He looked at me, and he said, "Ruth, your mother and I have been in discussion with your Uncle Jonas and Aunt Salome. It has been decided that you and Eli will marry in the spring, after your baptism." I remember laughing. I actually laughed, a short, startled sound, because for one foolish moment I thought it was some kind of joke, the kind of teasing my father almost never engaged in, but which I thought, in that instant, must have been what this was. Eli, my cousin Eli, who not 2 summers before had dared me to eat a whole green apple and then laughed himself sick when I got a stomachache for it. My father did not laugh. His face did not move at all, and that stillness told me more than any words could have, that this was not a joke, that this had already been decided, discussed, agreed upon, and that I was being informed of it, not asked about it. "Married," I said. "To Eli." "Yes, but he is my cousin. He is your first cousin, yes. It is not forbidden by the church, though it is uncommon, and it will raise talk. That is why it will be handled quietly, and why the two of you will be seen at the singings together this winter, so that by spring it appears to have come about in the natural way. I want you to understand, dear, that this was the moment my entire understanding of my own life split into a before and an after. Before that evening, I was a girl who believed, in the unquestioning way children believe things, that my life, while certainly not entirely my own, would at least unfold according to a pattern I recognized. A pattern I had watched play out for my older sisters. A pattern with at least the illusion of choice in it. A boy noticing me at a singing, offering to drive me home. The slow public unfolding of a courtship that the whole community could watch and approve of. After that evening, I understood that none of that had ever really been up to me at all. That it had simply looked that way for Katie and Miriam, because the boys my father had already approved of, in his own quiet way, happened to be boys who were also drawn to my sisters, so the choosing and the approving had lined up neatly enough that nobody, including my sisters, had ever needed to feel the hand on the back of their neck steering them. I felt that hand now. I felt it very clearly. I said, and I remember my voice shaking though I tried to keep it steady, Father, I don't love Eli. Not like that. He's my cousin. I've never thought of him in that way, not once. My father's response has stayed with me for 62 years. Word for word, the way certain sentences do stay with you, burned into the mind the way a hot iron burns into hide. He said, "Love is not the foundation of a marriage, Ruth. Love is what grows in a marriage, if God wills it, after the foundation is properly laid. Duty is the foundation. Faith is the foundation. A wife's submission to her husband and her father is the foundation. You will learn to love him. Your mother learned to love me." I looked at my mother when he said that. I wanted her to say something, to soften it, to tell me it would not be so bad, or even, in some secret part of my heart that I am ashamed of even now, I wanted her to rise up and say no. This is wrong. I will not allow it. She did neither. She kept her eyes on her folded hands, and after a long moment, she said, very quietly, "Your father knows what is best for this family, Ruth. There is more at stake here than you understand right now. Someday, you will understand it." I did not understand it that night. I understood it perhaps a year later, when I overheard, quite by accident, a conversation between my father and my Uncle Jonas out by the hog pen. A conversation about notes and interest and a bank in Millersburg. And I put together, piece by piece, the way a child pieces together the truth of Christmas long after they have stopped believing in it. That my marriage was not a matter of love or even of simple family tradition, but a business arrangement between two men, dressed up in the language of God's will and family duty, but underneath it all, a way to save my Uncle Jonas's farm from being lost, and to secure for my father, and eventually for Eli under my father's guidance, control over land that would double the size of what either family held on its own. I was 17 years old, and I had just learned that I was, in the truest sense of an old-fashioned word that we do not like to use anymore, a piece of property being used to settle a debt. I cried that night, dear, more than I had ever cried in my life up to that point. I cried into my pillow so my younger sister Sarah, who shared my bed, would not wake and ask what was wrong, though I think she woke anyway and simply pretended not to, out of the kind of mercy that only a younger sister who loves you can offer. I did not sleep at all. I lay awake, and I thought about running. I actually thought about it, seriously, the way a trapped animal thinks about the gap in the fence. I thought about walking to the phone shanty at the end of the Byler's Lane and calling my Aunt Ruth, my mother's other sister, The one who had left the church entirely 15 years before and lived somewhere in Columbus. A woman whose name I had been given but whose face I had never seen. Because she was shunned, and we did not speak of her, and certainly did not visit her. I did not run that night. I want to be honest with you about why, because I think it matters. It was not simply fear, though I was afraid. It was not simply lack of resources, though I had no money of my own, not so much as $1, and no idea how a person even went about surviving in the English world. It was something deeper than that, something that I think anyone raised the way I was raised will understand even if you were not raised Amish. It was the fear of losing everyone I had ever loved in a single stroke. Because that is what leaving would have meant. Not just leaving my father and mother, who I was furious with, but leaving my sisters, my brothers, my grandmother who still lived with us then, my whole church district, every friend I had ever had, everyone who had ever known me, forever, with no path back. Because that is what shunning means among our people. It is not a temporary punishment. It is a door that closes and does not open again. Not really. Not in the way it was before. I chose, that night, lying awake with tears drying stiff on my cheeks, to stay. I want you to understand that I did not choose it because I wanted to marry Eli. I chose it because the alternative was a kind of death. The death of everything and everyone I had ever known. And at 17 years old, I did not have the courage, or perhaps I should say I did not yet have the strength, because I do not think it is only courage, to walk through that door alone into a world I knew nothing about. So I stayed, and in the weeks that followed, I did what was expected of me. I began attending the Sunday evening singings with a face I had trained into something like calm, and Eli, who I would later learn, had received a nearly identical conversation from his own father around the same time I received mine, began driving me home afterward in his open buggy, the two of us sitting stiffly apart on the bench seat, making the kind of small, careful conversation that neither of us had ever needed to make with each other before, because we had known each other our whole lives and had never once needed to perform the ritual of courtship. And now, here we were performing it very badly, for the benefit of an entire church district that, as far as I could tell, mostly believed the story, because why would they not? I remember the first night he drove me home under this new arrangement. Neither of us spoke for almost the entire 2 miles. Finally, somewhere near the Hochstettlers' fence line, Eli said, without looking at me, keeping his eyes fixed on the road ahead and the horse's ears in front of him. "I'm sorry, Ruth." "For what?" I said, though I knew exactly what. "For all of it. I didn't ask for this either. I want you to know that." I remember turning to look at him properly for the first time in weeks, really looking at him, this boy I had known my entire life, and seeing, for the first time, not my cousin, not my childhood playmate, but a young man who was just as trapped as I was, just as powerless in the face of our father's arrangement, just as unable to say no without losing everything he had ever known. It did not make me love him. I want to be very clear about that, because I know some of you watching are hoping this story turns quickly into a sweet romance, and it does not. Not for a long, long time. But it did make me feel, for the first time since that terrible night at the kitchen table, that I was not entirely alone in this. "I know," I said. And that was all either of us said for the rest of the ride. Over that winter, we developed what I can only describe as an alliance, not a courtship. Not in the way courtship is supposed to feel, full of stolen glances and quickened pulses, but an alliance between two young people who had been handed the same sentence and were trying to figure out how to serve it without losing themselves entirely in the process. We talked on those long buggy rides home in the cold about things we had never talked about before. We talked about what we actually wanted from life, which neither of us had ever been asked before, not once, by anyone. Eli told me he had always secretly wanted to be a carpenter. Real fine carpentry, cabinetry. The kind of skilled work that some of the men in more progressive districts were beginning to do as their primary trade instead of farming. But that his father needed him on the farm, especially now, and there was no room in the plan for what Eli wanted. I told him that I had always loved learning, that I used to beg my teacher at our one-room schoolhouse to let me stay after and read extra books before our formal schooling ended at 8th grade, as was our way, and that some secret, foolish part of me had always wondered what it would be like to keep learning past that, though I knew that wondering itself was a kind of sin, a kind of pride, wanting more than what God and the church had laid out for a woman's life. We were, I realize now, two young people finding a strange kind of friendship in the wreckage of the future we had each imagined for ourselves. It was not romance, but it was something, and in the depths of that hard winter, something was more than I had expected to find. There was, however, someone else. I have never told this part of the story publicly before, not even to my own children, and I am only telling it to you now because I promised myself the whole truth, and because I believe, at 81 years old, that some truths need to be spoken before a person leaves this world, or they simply die unspoken. And what is the point of carrying a truth your whole life, only to let it disappear? With you. His name was Daniel. He was not from our district. I had met him only twice, both times at a wedding 2 districts over, the kind of large community wedding where young people from different settlements sometimes mingled at the corner tables reserved for the unmarried youth. He was quiet and funny in a dry way that caught me off guard because I was not expecting it, and he had asked, at the second wedding, very properly, very correctly, whether he might write to me. I had said yes. I want you to understand that this was nothing scandalous, nothing improper by our standards. Letter writing between young people from different districts who had met at a wedding was a perfectly normal, sanctioned way for courtship to begin at a distance, before a young man might eventually ask to visit or to drive a girl home if their paths crossed again. We wrote to each other for almost 4 months, Daniel and I, before my father sat me down at that kitchen table. I had told no one, not even my sisters, because it felt too new, too fragile, too much like something I wanted to protect before I even understood what it was myself. I still have, tucked away in a cedar box in my bedroom closet to this day, 60-some years later, the 7 letters he sent me before it all ended. I have read them so many times over the decades that the folds have worn soft as cloth. When my father told me I would marry Eli, one of the very first things that went through my mind, even before the full weight of the arrangement had settled on me, was Daniel's face, and the understanding that I would now have to write him one final letter, and that it would be the hardest letter I had ever written in my life, and that I could never, ever tell him, or anyone, the real reason why. I wrote that I had changed my mind, that I did not think our correspondence should continue, that I hoped he would understand, and would not think too poorly of me. I did not tell him about Eli. I did not tell him about the debt, or the land, or my father's plan. I simply closed a door, gently as I could, on a boy who had, in 4 months of careful, thoughtful letters, shown me more genuine interest in who I actually was, my thoughts, my hopes, my small private dreams about learning and books, than I had ever received from anyone outside my own family in my entire life. I never heard from Daniel again, not directly. I learned, years later, through the winding grapevine of our community's gossip, which travels farther and faster than any of us like to admit, that he had married a girl from his own district about 2 years after our letters stopped, and that by all accounts he had a good life, a good farm, several children. I am glad of that, dear. I truly am, but I will not pretend to you that I did not think of him, now and again, over the years that followed, especially in the hardest years of my own marriage, when I would lie awake beside a husband I had not chosen and wonder, in the quiet dark, what my life might have looked like if I had been born into a different kind of family. One where a girl's own heart was allowed to matter. Winter turned to spring, the way it always does no matter how much a person might wish time would simply stop. I was baptized into the church on a Sunday morning in early April, kneeling in my mother's kitchen dress, the bishop's hands on my head, promising before God and the entire congregation that I would live according to the Ordnung, the rules of our church, for the rest of my life, that I would submit to its discipline, that I would never turn away from it. I meant those words when I said them, dear. I want you to know that. Whatever anger I carried about the marriage that had been arranged for me, my faith itself was not something I was performing. I believed, and I still believe, in God, in the gospel, in the value of a life lived humbly, and in service to family and community, rather than in service to one's own wants. But I would be lying to you if I did not admit that kneeling there that morning, I understood for the first time how completely that baptism sealed my fate. Because now, there was no version of leaving that did not also mean leaving my eternal soul's community in the eyes of everyone I knew. 6 weeks later, I married Eli. Amish weddings in our community were held on Tuesdays or Thursdays, and mine was a Thursday in late May, chosen, I would learn later, in part because it fell during a lull in the planting season when both families could spare the labor for a full day of celebration, which tells you something about how even my wedding day was, in some small way, scheduled around the practical needs of 2 farms, rather than around anything so sentimental as a favorite season or a meaningful date. I wore a new dress, sewn by my mother and my aunts over the preceding weeks. A deep blue, the traditional color for an Amish bride in our district, with a white organdy cape and apron pinned over it. The same dress, in fact, that I would be buried in one day, God willing, kept folded in tissue in a trunk in my attic even now, because that is our way. The wedding dress becomes the burial dress, a thought that struck me even at 17 as strange and a little frightening, that the garment marking the beginning of my married life was already, in the same breath, marking its end. The wedding was held at my parents' farm, because that was our custom, the bride's family hosting. Nearly 400 people came, dear. If you can imagine that, the entire church district and beyond, relatives traveling from as far as Indiana, and even one family from a settlement in Wisconsin. Because Eli and I, between our 2 families, had a great many relatives, which of course makes a certain grim sense when you understand how closely our 2 families were already intertwined even before the wedding took place. I remember very little of the ceremony itself, if I am honest with you. I remember standing beside Eli in the front of the barn that had been cleared and set with rows of backless benches for the service, which lasted nearly 3 hours, as was our custom, full of hymn singing and long sermons from the bishop and the ministers about the meaning of marriage, about Adam and Eve, about the duties of a husband to love his wife as Christ loved the church, and the duties of a wife to submit to her husband as the church submits to Christ. I remember the bishop asking us the traditional questions, whether we believed this union had been ordained by God, whether we would remain faithful to each other in sickness and adversity until death. And I remember answering yes, in a voice that did not sound entirely like my own, because in some strange way it did not feel entirely like my own life happening to me. More like I was watching it happen to someone who looked like me and shared my name. I remember the meal after, roast chicken and filling, the traditional wedding dish of bread stuffing and gravy that every Amish bride in our community serves, mashed potatoes, creamed celery, which is a peculiar tradition of ours, celery being planted near the birth of a child who is expected to marry, and then used decoratively and in dishes at that child's own wedding years later. So there was celery from stalks my mother had been tending in some sense since before I could even walk. I remember the singing that went on late into the evening, the young people's table where Eli and I sat as the guests of honor, called the Ek, the corner table, decorated more elaborately than the rest. And I remember, late that night, after the guests had finally gone home and the tables had been cleared, sitting in the small tenant house on my father's property that had been prepared for Eli and me to live in for our first year of marriage, before we would move to take over management of Eli's father's farm the following spring, according to the larger plan our fathers had made. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, still in my wedding dress because I had not been able to bring myself to change out of it yet, and looking at Eli, who was sitting on the other side of that same bed, both of us still and quiet in a way that had nothing to do with peace. Well, Eli said finally, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound light and failing, "Here we are. Here we are," I echoed. We were married. We were, by every legal and religious measure our community recognized, husband and wife. And we were, in every way that mattered to two frightened 17 and 18-year-olds who had grown up as playmates and were now expected to be partners in the fullest sense of that word. Still essentially strangers to each other in the ways that count between a man and his wife. I will not go into great detail about that first night, dear, because some things belong only to the two people who lived them. But I will tell you that it was awkward and a little painful, and not at all what any of the hushed, incomplete conversations I'd had with my mother and older sisters in the weeks leading up to the wedding had prepared me for, and that afterward, we lay there in the dark, not touching. Both of us, I think, quietly grieving something neither of us could name. And eventually Eli reached over in the dark and took my hand. Not for any reason beyond simple human comfort. Two people who had lost the same things on the same day, needing to know they were not entirely alone in the losing of them. And we fell asleep that way, hand in hand, like the children we had so recently been. That, dear, was the true beginning of my marriage. Not romance, not passion. Two frightened young people, holding hands in the dark, trying to find some way to survive what had been decided for them. The first year was in many ways the hardest. We were living in that small tenant house, just the two of us, learning to run a household together, which meant learning each other in ways our childhood friendship had never required. I discovered that Eli snored terribly when he had a cold. He discovered that I could not cook a decent pot roast to save my life that first year, something my mother-in-law, who was also of course my aunt, took great and not entirely kind pleasure in pointing out at Sunday dinners. We discovered that we argued, sometimes bitterly, over small things, over how the household money should be managed, over whose family's way of doing a particular chore was correct. Arguments that I now understand, looking back with 81 years of perspective, were never really about pot roast or household money at all, but about two people trying to find some small measure of control in a life where the largest decision either of us would ever make had been made entirely without us. There was resentment in that first year. Dear, real resentment. And I want to be honest with you about that. Because I think too many people who tell stories like mine skip straight past the hard parts to get to a happy ending. And that does a disservice to anyone else out there who might be living through their own hard parts right now and needs to know that hard parts are survivable. That they do not necessarily mean the end of everything. I resented Eli unfairly because he was the nearest and safest target for a rage that actually belonged to my father and his father, to the whole system of arrangement and duty and debt that had shaped both our lives without our consent. There were nights I cried myself to sleep still, more than a year into the marriage, missing Daniel, missing letters that would never come again, wondering what kind of life I might have built if I had been born a different girl into a different family. There were nights Eli would sit out on the porch alone long after I had gone to bed, and I would hear him out there, not crying exactly. Amish men of that generation did not cry. Not where anyone could hear, but sitting in a kind of silence that had weight to it. A silence I understood because I carried my own version of it. Our first child came a little less than a year after our wedding. A daughter we named Anna, after Eli's grandmother. I remember the fear of that first labor more clearly than almost anything else from those years. Because in our community, childbirth happened at home, with a midwife, and while I trusted the women around me, my mother-in-law who was also my aunt, the midwife who had delivered half the babies in our district, there was still a primal terror to it that no amount of trust could fully erase, especially at 18 years old. Still very much a girl in so many ways despite the wedding ring on my finger. But when Anna was placed in my arms, red-faced and squalling, something shifted in me that I had not expected. I want to be careful here, because I do not want to suggest to you that a baby fixed my marriage, because that is not what happened. Not exactly. And I think it is important to say that plainly, because too many people believe that children can repair what a marriage itself cannot. And that is a dangerous belief that has kept many women, in our community and outside of it, trapped far longer than they should have been. Anna did not fix my marriage. But she gave me something to love without complication, without history, without the weight of arrangement or debt or resentment attached to it, and in loving her so completely, so instantly, I found, almost by accident, a way back into loving other things too. I watched Eli hold her that first night, this tiny, furious, red-faced creature that we had somehow made together despite everything, and I saw something cross his face that I had not seen before, not in our childhood friendship, not in our year of careful, wary marriage. I saw wonder. I saw a kind of tenderness that had nowhere else to go except toward this small new person, and in watching him feel that, I felt, for the first time since that terrible evening at my father's kitchen table, something that was not quite love yet, but was perhaps love's very distant cousin. Call it the beginning of respect. Call it the recognition of shared purpose. Whatever you want to call it, it was a seed. And seeds, dear, given enough time and enough hard, patient tending, do grow. The following spring, as had always been the plan, Eli and I moved to take over the daily operation of his parents' farm, with his father and mother, my aunt and uncle, moving into the smaller Doughty house, the grandparents' house attached to the main farmhouse, as is our tradition when the older generation steps back from active farm work. My own father took on a supervisory role in the combined operation of both farms, which had, as I had learned that terrible day by the hog pen, always been the true purpose of the marriage, to consolidate the land and resolve my Uncle Jonas's debts under my father's more careful management. I will tell you, dear, that watching this plan unfold exactly as it had apparently been designed to unfold, watching my own life's largest turning point revealed, piece by piece, as simply one gear in a larger financial machine, was a bitter thing to witness, even 2 years after the fact. I do not think that bitterness ever fully left me, not even now, 81 years old, and looking back with whatever wisdom age has given me. Some things you forgive, some things you make peace with, but I am not sure bitterness like that ever entirely disappears. I think you simply learn to carry it more quietly. The years that followed brought more children. After Anna came a son, Jonas, named for Eli's father, then another daughter, Fanny, named for my own mother, then twin boys, Amos and Aaron, whom we nearly lost in their first winter to a bad fever that swept through our district and took 2 other babies in neighboring families that same season. A memory that still tightens my chest to recall even now, 60 years later. The fear of sitting up all night with 2 tiny burning bodies, praying in a way I had never prayed before, bargaining with God in the desperate way a mother bargains when nothing else is left to her. They survived, thank the Lord. Though Aaron was never quite as strong as his brother afterward. Something in his lungs that troubled him his whole life, and that I have always privately believed was a lingering mark of that terrible winter. By the time I was 30 years old, I had 7 living children, and I want to tell you, dear, that somewhere in the raising of those first several babies, in the shared exhaustion of 2 young parents up at all hours, in the shared labor of running a farm that now supported not just ourselves, but a rapidly growing family, something did change between Eli and me. It did not happen suddenly. There was no single moment I could point to and say, there, that is when I fell in love with my husband. It happened the way a callus forms, slowly, through repeated friction, until one day you realize the tender place that used to hurt has become something strong instead. I remember one particular night that I have always thought of, privately, as something of a turning point, though Eli and I never discussed it in those terms at the time. It was during a terrible ice storm. The winter Aaron and Amos were about 3 years old, and half our roof had begun to leak badly. Water coming down into the upstairs hallway, right where the children slept. Eli was up on that roof in the freezing sleet at 10 o'clock at night, trying to nail down a tarp before the whole ceiling gave way, and I was up there with him, holding the lantern steady with hands that had gone numb from the cold, both of us soaked through and shivering. And at one point, Eli slipped, badly. And I genuinely believed for one heart-stopping second that he was going to fall. The full 2 stories to the frozen ground below. I grabbed his arm, with a strength I did not know I had, and held on, and somehow between the 2 of us, we kept him from falling. Afterward, once we were both back inside, dripping and shaking, warming ourselves by the stove with the children thankfully still asleep despite all the commotion, Eli looked at me for a long moment and said, "You saved my life just now." And I said, without really thinking about it, without any performance or duty behind the words, "Well, I wasn't about to raise 7 children alone, Eli Yoda. You're stuck with me." He laughed, dear, really laughed. A big surprised laugh that I had not heard from him in years, not since we were children catching frogs by the creek. And I laughed too. And something between us shifted in that moment, standing there soaked and freezing and laughing by the stove at 2 in the morning. I do not think either of us used the word love out loud that night. We were not the kind of people, raised the way we were raised, who said such things easily or often. But I think we both understood, in that moment, that whatever had begun as an arrangement forced on us by our fathers had somewhere along the way become something else, something we had built ourselves, brick by brick, hardship by hardship, without either of us fully noticing it happening, until it was simply, undeniably there. That is not to say the hard years were behind us. Oh dear, they were not. Not by a long stretch. Farming is a hard life in the best of times, and we had our share of the worst of times too. There was a summer in the late 1970s when a drought so severe hit our county that we lost nearly our entire corn crop, and I remember Eli sitting at that same long wooden table where my own life had been decided so many years before, doing figures late into the night, trying to work out how we would feed both our family and our herd through the coming winter, his face gray with worry in the lamplight in a way that frightened me more than almost anything else in our marriage had. There was the year my father died, when I was 36 years old, a sudden failure of the heart while he was out in the field, and I remember the strange, complicated grief of that loss. Grief for a father I had genuinely loved despite everything. Grief tangled up with an anger toward him that I had never fully resolved, and that his death meant I now never would. Not through any conversation. Not through any apology I might have someday hoped to receive from him. Because he went to his grave, as far as I know, never once acknowledging to me directly that what he had done to me at 17 years old had been anything other than his fatherly duty, properly discharged. There was the year our son Jonas, our second child, our first son, left the community entirely during his Rumspringa and did not return for almost 3 years. A period that nearly broke my heart in half, not knowing where he was for months at a stretch. Receiving the occasional letter from some city, Cleveland. Then, Columbus. Then, for a while we did not hear from him at all, and I feared the very worst a mother can fear. He did come back, eventually, chose baptism, chose to stay, married a lovely girl from a neighboring district, and is to this day one of the great joys of my old age. But I will tell you, dear, that those 3 years of silence and uncertainty aged me more than almost any other single trial in my life, and I understood. Watching my own son wrestle with the same walls that had once closed in around me at 17, a new and painful kind of empathy for what it must have looked like from the outside, all those years ago, when I myself had lain awake at night thinking about running. There was illness. There was the loss of our third child, Fanny, to a car accident on the highway near our farm when she was only 22 years old, struck by an English driver who fell asleep at the wheel while she was walking home from a quilting circle at a neighbor's house. I do not think there is any pain in this world quite like burying a child, dear, and I will not pretend to you that our faith, strong as it was, strong as it remains for me even now, made that loss easy to bear. It did not. What it did was give us a framework within which to carry it. A community that surrounded us within hours of hearing the news and did not leave our side for weeks, brought food, sat with us, prayed with us, helped Eli and me survive a grief that I genuinely believe might have destroyed either of us if we had faced it entirely alone. And it was in the surviving of that grief, dear, more than in any happy moment before it, that I think Eli and I became, truly and completely, partners in the deepest sense of that word. Because grief like that either tears two people apart, or it welds them together in a way nothing else can. And for us, by God's grace, it welded us together. I remember Eli holding me every single night for months after we lost Fanny, not saying anything, because there was nothing to say, simply holding on, the same way I had once held on to him on that icy roof, both of us understanding by then, deep in our bones, that whatever else this marriage had been, forced upon us, built on debt and land and our father's careful arrangements, it had also become the single sturdiest thing in either of our lives. The place we returned to no matter what the world took from us. The years after that moved differently than the years before. I do not know quite how to explain it, except to say that once you have survived the worst thing you believe you can survive, time takes on a different shape. The small irritations of married life, the arguments over money or over whose way of doing a chore was correct, simply mattered less than they once had. Eli and I settled into a rhythm together that I can only describe as comfortable, in the truest and best sense of that word. The comfort of two people who know each other so completely that entire conversations can happen in a single glance across a crowded kitchen at a family gathering, who know exactly how the other takes their coffee, and exactly which pew the other prefers to sit in at church, and exactly what to say, or more often, exactly when to say nothing at all, when the other is troubled. Our remaining children grew, as children do, faster than any parent is ever quite ready for. Anna, our first, married a young man from our own district when she was 19, a farmer's son, and settled less than 3 miles from us, close enough that I could see her regularly, which was a mercy I did not take for granted after watching how far some of my own siblings' children had scattered by then, some even leaving the church entirely and settling in distant states. A trend that was only beginning in my day, but that has become far more common now among the younger generations. Something the elders in our community worry over constantly, though I confess I have come to hold gentler views on it than many of my peers, having lived through the fear of losing my own son Jonas during his Rumspringa, and having learned, through that fear, that love has to be wider than judgment if it is going to survive contact with the real, complicated lives our children actually go on to live. Jonas, once he returned from his years away and chose baptism, took over increasing responsibility for our farm as Ellie and I grew older, eventually becoming, along with his own growing family, the primary operators of the land that had once been the whole cause of my forced marriage in the first place. A strange kind of full circle that I have thought about often over the years. This same 60-some acres. Once merely collateral in a debt arrangement between two fathers, now simply home. Simply the place where my grandchildren learned to walk, where my great-grandchildren now play in the very hay barn, where Eli and I once caught frogs together as small cousins, with no idea what our fathers had planned for us. Our twin sons, Amos and Aaron, both eventually took up trades rather than farming full-time, Amos becoming a skilled furniture maker, which always struck me as a quiet echo of the carpentry dreams Eli himself had once confided to me on those long, careful buggy rides home during our strange courtship, and I have wondered, more than once, whether some part of Eli's own unlived dream found its way, without either of us ever discussing it directly, into the encouragement he gave Amos to pursue that trade rather than insisting, as his own father once had of him, that farming was the only acceptable path for a son. Aaron, whose lungs never fully recovered their strength after that terrible fevered winter of his infancy, went into harness and leather work instead, a trade that kept him closer to home and required less physical strain than farm labor, and he has built a fine, respected business of it over the decades, one that his own sons now help him run. We lost Fanny, as I told you, far too young, and there is not a single one of her siblings' weddings, not a single grandchild's birth, not a single Christmas gathering in the 50 years since that has passed without her absence being felt, quietly, by everyone in the family who remembers her, and even, in a strange way, by the younger ones who never knew her at all but grew up hearing her name spoken with a particular tenderness that taught them, without anyone ever explaining it directly, that this was a person who mattered enormously, and whose loss still mattered too. Our youngest children, born in the years after the twins, a daughter named Rebecca and a son named David, both grew up in a household that was, by the time they came along, far more settled and peaceful than the household their older siblings had been born into. And I think often about how strange it is that the same marriage, the very same two people, can offer such a different experience to children born 10 or 12 years apart, simply because of how much healing and understanding had accumulated between their parents by the time the younger ones arrived. Rebecca has told me, as an adult woman herself now with children of her own, that she never once doubted growing up that her mother and father loved each other deeply. And it strikes me every time she says this, because I know something she did not know until I finally told her myself, only a few years ago, that the marriage she grew up believing was a natural love match had actually begun as an arrangement neither Eli nor I had ever wanted. I want to talk with you now, dear, about grandchildren, because if there is any pure, uncomplicated joy left in a long Amish life like mine, it is this. I have, at the time I am telling you this story, 31 grandchildren and, count them if you can imagine it, 47 great-grandchildren, with 2 more expected before the year is out. I do not say this to boast, because boasting is not our way, but simply because I want you to understand the scale of what one forced marriage between 2 frightened teenagers, all those decades ago, eventually became. An entire river of lives, dear. An entire river of lives that would not exist, not one of them, if my father had not sat me down at that kitchen table on that terrible October evening in 1961 and told me who I was going to marry. I think about that often, in my old age, the strange arithmetic of it. I do not say this to justify what my father did. I want to be very clear about that, because I have heard people try to use exactly this kind of reasoning to excuse all manner of cruelty. The idea that because good eventually came from a wrong, the wrong itself becomes somehow acceptable, even ordained. I do not believe that, dear. Not even now. What my father did, forcing his 17-year-old daughter into a marriage designed primarily to solve his brother-in-law's debts, dressed up in religious language about duty and God's will, was wrong. It was a wrong committed against me. A young woman who had no say in the largest decision of her own life, and I do not think the eventual joy of my grandchildren erases that wrong or makes it retroactively acceptable. What I do believe, and this took me most of my adult life to arrive at honestly, is that it is possible to hold both things at once. It is possible to say, my father wronged me, and also, I do not know how to wish away the life that grew from that wrong, because that life includes people I love beyond any measure I have words for. That is a hard thing to hold, dear. I will not pretend it is not. There have been long stretches of my life, particularly in my middle years, when I could not hold both things at once. When I swung entirely toward anger at my father, refusing to see any good at all in what he had done, and other long stretches when I swung entirely the other way, trying to convince myself that everything had worked out for the best, and that my anger was therefore somehow ungrateful or unfaithful. It has taken me most of 81 years to find the place where I can hold both truths steady in my 2 hands, without needing to drop one in order to hold the other properly. Let me tell you now about the world changing around us, because I think that matters to this story too. When Eli and I were first married, our community was, in many ways, more isolated from the English world than it is today. We had no electricity, no telephones in the house, no automobiles, the same as our parents and grandparents before us. Over the decades since, I have watched our district and Amish communities across the country navigate an enormous amount of change, some of it welcomed, much of it resisted, nearly all of it debated at great length among the ministers and the church membership at our twice-yearly members' meetings. Tourism became a significant part of our local economy, in a way it had never been in my childhood. Busloads of English visitors coming through Holmes County to look at us, deer, to photograph our buggies and our farms, as though we were some kind of living museum, rather than simply people trying to live faithfully according to our understanding of Scripture. I have complicated feelings about this, if I am honest with you. On one hand, the tourism has brought real economic benefit to many families in our community, including our own, as several of my grandchildren now run small businesses, furniture shops, bakeries, quilt shops, that depend significantly on that tourist trade. On the other hand, there is something that has always sat uneasily with me about being looked at that way, about being turned into a kind of spectacle for people driving through in air-conditioned cars, snapping photographs of my grandchildren playing in the yard as though they were animals in a zoo, rather than children. I have also watched, over these 6 decades, real and meaningful change within our own community's practices. Changes that have made me hopeful in ways I did not expect to feel hopeful at my age. Arranged marriages of the kind that shaped my own life have become vanishingly rare in most Amish communities, including our own, and I do believe, though I cannot prove it, that stories like mine, quiet as they were kept for so long, eventually filtered through enough families and enough generations that they contributed, in some small way, to a broader shift in how our community understands a young person's right to choose their own spouse. I have heard our current bishop, a much younger man than the bishop who married Eli and me all those decades ago, speak directly, in a members' meeting only a few years back, about the importance of a young couple coming together through genuine mutual affection and free choice, language I never once heard spoken aloud in any official capacity during my own youth. I do not know if my own story played any direct part in that shift, dear. Probably not. Probably it was simply the slow turning of an entire community's conscience over generations. But I like to imagine, in my more hopeful moments, that somewhere in that slow turning, a little bit of my own quiet suffering was not entirely wasted. I suppose you are wondering, dear, what life actually looks like now, 62 years after that terrible evening at my father's kitchen table. 61 years after that awkward, aching wedding day in my parents' barn. Let me tell you. Eli and I still live in the farmhouse we moved into as young marrieds, though it has been expanded and renovated many times over the decades to accommodate our growing family, and eventually to accommodate our aging bodies. We have a dodie house of our own now, attached to the main house, where our son Jonas and his wife and their children live in the primary farmhouse, running the day-to-day operation of the farm, while Eli and I have settled into the quieter, smaller space. The same arrangement his own parents once made for us. The same arrangement my own grandparents made before them. A pattern repeating itself down through generations, the way certain patterns do in a farming family, regardless of how that particular generation's marriage came to be. Eli is 82 now, a year older than me, and I will tell you honestly, dear, that watching him age has been one of the strangest and most tender experiences of my life. This is the same boy who taught me to whistle through a blade of grass by the creek when we were children too young to understand what our fathers were planning for us. This is the same young man who sat stiff and awkward beside me on a buggy bench during that terrible performed courtship, apologizing for a decision neither of us had made. This is the same husband who held my hand through the loss of our daughter, who nearly fell off an icy roof trying to keep our children's beds dry, who wept, actually wept, real tears down his weathered cheeks, the first time I ever saw him do so, when our first grandchild was placed in his arms. His hands shake now when he tries to do fine work, the kind of careful woodworking he still loves to putter at in the small shop attached to our dowdy house. His hearing has gone significantly in his left ear, so that I have learned to always sit on his right side at church and at family gatherings, a small accommodation that has become so automatic to both of us that we hardly notice ourselves making it anymore. He had a health scare 4 years ago, dear. A blockage in his heart that required a procedure at the hospital in Worcester, and I will tell you that sitting in that waiting room, surrounded by our children and several of our grandchildren who had all rushed to be there, I understood something I do not think I had ever let myself fully understand before. Not even during the hardest years of our young marriage. Not even during our shared grief over Fanny. I understood that I could not imagine my life without this man beside me. Not this specific man particularly, in some romantic sense, the way I might have once imagined loving Daniel. But this man, the actual man Eli had become over 60 years of shared labor and shared grief, and shared small daily kindnesses. Coffee brought to me in bed on cold mornings. A hand on my shoulder during a hard sermon. Decades of quiet companionship that had, somewhere along the way, become the very architecture of my own identity. I did not know how to be Ruth without also being Eli's wife anymore. And sitting in that hospital waiting room, I prayed harder than I think I have ever prayed in my life, that I would not have to find out. He recovered, thank the Lord, and is doing reasonably well now, though we both move more slowly than we once did. Though we both nap in the afternoons now in a way neither of us would have dreamed of doing as young farmers with 7 children underfoot. Though our evenings are quieter, spent on the small porch attached to our dowdy house, watching the sun go down over land that has been in our combined families for well over a century now. Land that was, once, the entire secret reason my own life was rearranged without my consent, and is now, simply, home. The place where I expect, God willing, to spend whatever years remain to me. I want to tell you something now, dear, about my father, because I think it matters to the fullness of this story. My father died in 1980, when I was 36, as I mentioned, and I told you that he never once acknowledged, in the years between my wedding and his death, that what he had done to me had been anything other than proper fatherly duty. That is true, but I want to tell you about something that happened perhaps 2 years before he died. Something I have thought about often in the decades since. Something that has shaped how I have come to understand him. And forgiveness. And the strange, imperfect way that people manage to love each other, even while wounding each other terribly. I had gone to visit my parents on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, bringing along my youngest, David, who was still a small boy at the time. My father was out on the porch, alone, in the particular kind of stillness that had settled over him more and more in his later years. A man who had always been so certain, so decisive, so utterly convinced of his own rightness, growing quieter and more uncertain as age wore down whatever confidence had once made him capable of doing what he did to me at 17. I sat down beside him, mostly out of simple daughterly duty, not expecting any particular conversation, and we sat in silence for a long while, watching David chase a barn cat across the yard. Finally, my father said, without looking at me, in a voice I had rarely heard him use, quiet, almost hesitant, "Do you think Eli has made you happy, Ruth?" I remember being so startled by the question that I did not answer right away. My father did not ask questions like that. My father did not, in my entire experience of him, ask about feelings, about happiness, about the interior lives of his children at all. I finally said, carefully, "We have built a good life together, Father. It has not always been easy. But yes, I believe I am happy in the ways that matter." He nodded, slowly, still not looking at me. And then he said something that I have turned over in my mind 10,000 times in the decades since. He said, "I did not know, when I made that decision for you, whether it would turn out well or turn out badly. I told myself it would turn out well, because it needed to, for the sake of your Uncle Jonas's family, for the sake of the land. But I did not know, Ruth. I want you to understand that I did not know. And that not knowing has weighed on me more than you might think." That was the closest thing to an apology I ever received from my father, dear. And I want to be honest with you that it did not entirely satisfy me even at the time. It was not. I want you to understand, we did an English movie in my head. Please, dear listener, understand. It was not the kind of full accounting I might have wanted. An acknowledgement that what he had done was wrong regardless of how it turned out. An acknowledgement of my own suffering as a 17-year-old girl who had no say in her own life's largest decision. What he offered instead was closer to a confession of uncertainty, an admission that he had gambled with my life without any real confidence in the outcome, which is, in its own way, perhaps even more troubling than if he had simply believed, with total conviction, that he had done right by me. A man who gambles with his daughter's entire life and admits, decades later, that he was not even sure it would work out, is not, I think, a man who can be fully absolved, even by a daughter who has, by that point, found her own hard-won peace with the life that gamble produced. And yet, dear, I have found in my old age that I no longer carry the sharp, burning anger toward my father that I carried for so many years of my younger adulthood. What I carry instead is something more complicated, a kind of grief for him as much as anger at him. Grief for a man who was himself, I have come to understand, shaped by forces largely outside his own control. A man raised in a community and a generation that taught him, from his own childhood, that a father's authority over his children, and particularly over his daughters, was not merely a right, but a solemn duty before God. A man who genuinely believed, in whatever twisted way, that he was protecting his family, saving his brother-in-law from ruin, ensuring the long-term stability of 2 farms that would eventually support dozens, then hundreds, of descendants he would never live to meet. I do not say any of this to excuse him, dear. I want to be very clear, one more time, because I think this distinction matters enormously, and I do not want it lost in the softening that time and old age naturally bring to hard memories. What my father did was wrong. It was a violation of my own personhood, my own right to choose the shape of my own life, dressed up in religious and familial language that made it very difficult for me, or for anyone around me, to name it clearly as wrong at the time it was happening. I do not believe a good outcome, however genuinely good it eventually became, erases the wrongness of how it began. But I have also learned, over 81 years of living, that holding on to sharp anger at a man who has been dead for over 4 decades serves no purpose except to poison whatever years I myself have left. And so I have chosen, not to excuse him, but to set the anger down, the way you might finally set down a heavy basket you have been carrying so long, your arm has gone numb to the weight of it. I set it down not because he deserved to have it set down, dear, but because I deserve to no longer have to carry it. I know some of you watching this video clicked on it, at least in part, because of the words "married my cousin" in the title. and I imagine a good many of you are curious, perhaps a little uneasy about that particular aspect of my story. So let me address it directly, because I think avoiding it would be its own kind of dishonesty. First cousin marriage was never common in our community, dear, even in my own generation, and it has become essentially non-existent in the generations since, partly because of a growing understanding, even among our more traditional communities, of the increased health risks that can come with children born of such close blood relations, particularly across multiple generations of a genetically isolated population, which are Amish communities, by their very nature of marrying largely within the faith and within a limited number of founding families, already represent to a significant degree, even without additional first cousin unions layered on top. This is not a secret among us, dear. Whatever the outside world might assume about our knowledge of such things, our communities have long been aware, informally at least, of certain hereditary conditions that appear more frequently among Amish and Mennonite populations, precisely because of how genetically concentrated some of our founding bloodlines have become over the generations since our ancestors first arrived from Europe centuries ago. Conditions like certain metabolic disorders and forms of dwarfism that geneticists from the outside world have studied extensively in communities such as ours. Eli and I were, by God's mercy, spared any such difficulty in our own 7 children, all of whom were born healthy, aside from Aaron's lung troubles following that terrible fevered winter, which I do not believe was connected to our being cousins so much as simply an unfortunate illness that struck many infants that particular season, Amish and English alike, in families with no blood relation between the parents at all. But I want to be honest with you that this was in some sense fortune rather than certainty, and I know families in neighboring districts, generations back, who were not so fortunate, and I believe, though I have never said this aloud to anyone outside my own immediate family until this very moment, that this quiet, largely unspoken understanding of the risks is a significant part of why arrangements like mine, cousin marriages specifically, became so rare and eventually essentially disappeared from our community's practices, even before the broader shift away from arranged marriage more generally that I described earlier. There was talk about it, dear, when Eli and I were first married. Quiet talk. The kind that never quite reaches your own ears directly, but that you know is happening. The kind that travels through a community in murmurs at quiltings and in careful glances exchanged at church. Most people in our district, I believe, understood or at least suspected the true financial nature of the arrangement. Whatever the official story of natural courtship that had been carefully constructed around Eli and me during that winter of staged buggy rides. I do not think anyone in our community, at the time, would have named it publicly as wrong, because questioning a father's authority over his children's marriages was simply not something that was done in that era. But I have always believed, looking back, that there was a certain quiet discomfort among some of the older women in our district. Women who had perhaps seen or heard of similar arrangements gone badly in their own younger years, and who watched Eli and me in those early months of marriage with a particular kind of careful, sympathetic attention that I did not fully understand until I was much older myself, and had come to recognize that same quality of attention in my own eyes when I look now at young couples in our community whose courtship seems, to my old and experienced eye, perhaps a little too convenient, a little too neatly aligned with their father's business interests, for me to entirely believe it arose purely from young love. I want to say clearly, for anyone watching this who may themselves come from a close-knit, insular community of any kind, religious or otherwise, where marriages are still arranged by families for reasons of property, status, or convenience, that what happened to me was not unique to Amish communities, and it is not, I think, a fair criticism to level only at us. as I know some people outside our faith are quick to do when they hear stories like mine, treating it as some kind of proof that Amish life is uniquely backward or oppressive. Arranged marriage, and marriage as a tool of financial or political consolidation between families, has existed across nearly every culture and religion in human history, and continues to exist in various forms. In many communities around the world to this day, some far more restrictive than my own ever was. What I would ask of you, dear, whatever community you come from, whatever traditions shaped your own upbringing, is simply this: examine closely whether the traditions you have inherited actually serve the well-being and the genuine consent of the people living within them, or whether they serve, instead, the convenience and the financial interests of those who hold power within that community, dressed up as my own father dressed up his decision, in the comfortable language of duty, faith, and the natural order of things. Sometimes those two purposes align. Often, I have come to believe they do not. Let me speak now, for a while, about faith itself, because I do not want you to come away from this story believing that I hold any bitterness toward God or toward the Amish faith more broadly for what my father did to me, using the language of that faith as his justification. I want to be very careful in how I say this, dear, because I think it is a distinction that matters enormously and that is often lost in how outsiders talk about stories like mine. My father's decision to force my marriage was his decision, made using the tools and language available to him within our community's culture. But I do not believe it was God's decision, and I do not believe Scripture itself requires what my father did to me. There is a difference, dear, and it took me many years to fully separate those two things in my own heart. The difference between a specific man's specific choices, however much he may have dressed those choices in religious language, and the actual faith itself, which I have found, across 81 years of living, to be a source of genuine comfort, genuine guidance, and genuine community, even while some of the specific practices and authority structures built up around that faith by fallible human beings have at times caused real harm to people like me. My relationship with God, through all of this, has actually deepened rather than weakened, though I understand why some people who have experienced religious communities being used as instruments of control over their lives might find that hard to believe. I found, particularly during the hardest years of my young marriage, and especially during the unbearable grief of losing our daughter Fanny, that my faith was one of the very few things in my life that felt entirely, unquestionably my own. A relationship between myself and God that no father, no husband, no community elder could arrange or control on my behalf. I prayed my own prayers, in my own words, in the privacy of my own heart, and I believe, dear, that God heard every single one of them, including the angry ones, including the ones where I demanded to know why He had allowed my life to be taken from me and handed to a debt settlement between two men, including the ones, later, where I thanked Him, genuinely and completely, for the children and grandchildren and the deep, hard-won partnership with Eli that had grown from that same painful beginning. I do not believe God required my suffering. I believe God was present within it, and eventually, though it took decades, present within the healing of it too. I want to speak directly now to any young person watching this, particularly any young woman who might find herself in a situation even remotely similar to the one I found myself in at 17 years old. Whether that is within an Amish or Mennonite community, or within any other tradition, religious or cultural, where marriages are still arranged by families rather than chosen freely by the two people involved. I will not tell you that leaving is always the right answer, dear, because I did not leave, and I do not believe my life would have necessarily been better if I had, though I also cannot know that for certain, because none of us get to live the alternate versions of our own lives to compare them properly against the ones we actually lived. What I will tell you is this. If you find yourself in a situation where your own voice, your own wants, your own sense of who you might become, are being entirely erased in favor of someone else's plan for your life, dressed up though that plan may be in the language of duty or faith or family honor, I want you to know that your feelings about that are valid. I want you to know that the fear and the grief and the anger you may feel are not signs of weak faith or ingratitude or selfishness. They are the entirely appropriate response of a human soul to having its own agency taken from it. And you are allowed to feel every bit of that fear and grief and anger, even while you are also, perhaps, choosing, as I ultimately chose, to remain within the community and the life that has been shaped around you. I would also say this, and I say it carefully, because I do not want it to sound like I am suggesting that hardship is always redeemable, or that every forced situation eventually blossoms into something good, because that has simply not been true for every person I have known who lived through circumstances similar to my own. Some of those marriages, arranged the way mine was arranged, did not survive. Some of them produced decades of quiet misery rather than the hard-won partnership that Eli and I eventually built. I do not say this to frighten you, dear, but because I think honesty requires it. My story is not a promise that every forced beginning finds its way to a good ending. It is simply my own story, one particular life, and I would be doing you a disservice if I let you believe it was somehow a formula that guarantees the same outcome for everyone. What I can tell you, from my own 81 years, is that even within circumstances you did not choose, there remains, almost always, some small measure of choice left to you, in how you treat the person beside you, in whether you choose bitterness or whether you choose, slowly, patiently, to look for whatever good can be built even from difficult soil. Eli did not choose me any more than I chose him, but we both chose, again and again, across 62 years, how we would treat each other within a circumstance neither of us had asked for. That daily repeated choosing, dear, that is where I believe the real love in my marriage actually came from, not from some grand romantic beginning, because we never had one, but from 10,000 small choices made across 6 decades. To be kind rather than cruel, to be patient rather than resentful, to hold on rather than let go, even in our very worst moments, even when holding on felt like the harder thing to do. For parents watching this, and I know some of you are parents, perhaps parents within tight-knit religious or cultural communities of your own, I would ask you to sit with the story of my father for a while, the way I have had to sit with it across most of my adult life. My father was not, by the account of everyone who knew him, a monster. He was, by most measures, a devoted father, a faithful church member, a hard worker who genuinely believed he was doing right by his family and his extended family both. And yet what he did to me caused real, lasting harm that took me decades to make any kind of peace with, harm that I do not believe he ever fully understood the depth of, even in that rare, quiet confession on the porch 2 years before his death. I would ask you, whatever authority you hold over your own children's lives, to examine honestly whether the decisions you make on their behalf are truly serving their well-being, or whether they are serving your own convenience, your own reputation, your own financial interests, however sincerely you may have convinced yourself otherwise. Children, even grown children, Even children raised within traditions that emphasize obedience and submission to parental authority are not property, dear, and they are not tools for solving the problems of the adults around them. They are whole persons, with their own inner lives, their own hopes, their own right to have a genuine say in the largest decisions of their own future. And I believe, with everything in me, that a faith which truly honors God honors that personhood, rather than erasing it. Let me tell you now, dear, about an ordinary day in my life now. Because I think there is something valuable in the ordinary, something that gets lost when a story like mine is told only in its dramatic, painful, or triumphant moments, without also showing the quiet in-between spaces where most of a life is actually lived. I wake, most mornings, before the sun, the same as I have my entire life, though these days it is less out of necessity and more out of simple habit. A body that has known no other rhythm for 81 years and does not know how to unlearn it now. Eli is usually still asleep when I rise, and I make my way quietly to the small kitchen in our Dodie house, where I put the coffee on and sit for a few minutes in the particular stillness of very early morning, watching the sky lighten over the fields that have been in our family, in one combined form or another, for well over 100 years now. I read my Bible during this time, most mornings, a habit I began as a very young wife, searching for some solid ground beneath a life that had been rearranged without my consent, and that has simply never left me since, through every season of joy and every season of grief that followed. Eli rises not long after, moving more slowly than he once did, his hip troubling him in the cold months especially, and we have coffee together at our small table, the same quiet, easy silence between us that took decades to earn. A silence that no longer needs filling with performed conversation the way our earliest awkward buggy rides once did. Some mornings, one of our great-grandchildren wanders over from the main farmhouse to say good morning, and there is nothing, dear, nothing in this world that lights up an old woman's heart quite like a small child climbing uninvited into her lap while she is trying to drink her coffee. I still quilt. Most afternoons, my hands slower than they once were, but still capable. Still finding a particular peace in the repetitive motion of needle through fabric that I have relied on through every hard season of my life. The quilting circles of my youth, having given way, over the decades, to a smaller, quieter practice of quilting alone, or with one or two of my daughters or granddaughters, working on baby quilts now, mostly for the steady stream of new great-grandchildren that continues to arrive every year or two. Eli still putters in his small woodworking shop, though his hands shake too much now for the finest work, and I know it frustrates him, a man who was always proud, in his own quiet way, of skilled work done well. But he persists anyway. And I believe there is something valuable in that persistence itself, apart from whatever the finished product looks like. In the evenings, weather permitting, we sit together on the small porch of our Dowdy house, and this, dear, this quiet hour as the sun goes down over land that was once merely collateral in a debt arrangement between two frightened fathers, this is when I feel most fully the strange, complicated arc of my own life. I look at Eli, this old man beside me, his hands weathered and spotted with age, his hearing half gone, his hip troubling him, and I see, still, somewhere beneath all of that, the boy who taught me to whistle through a blade of grass by the creek, the young man who apologized to me on a buggy bench for a decision neither of us had made, the husband who held my hand through our darkest grief, the father who wept the first time he held his grandchild, 62 years of marriage. Dear, 62 years that began in a place of such powerlessness and grief that I genuinely did not believe, at 17 years old, that I would ever find anything resembling happiness within it. And yet here I am, 81 years old. And I will tell you plainly, without any performance or exaggeration, that I love this man beside me more completely than I have ever loved anything in this world, save for God himself and the children we raised together. Is that love the same as what I might have felt if I had been allowed to fall in love freely, the way my daughter Rebecca and my grandchildren have been able to do, choosing their own partners according to their own hearts rather than their father's business arrangements? I honestly do not know, dear. I have no way of comparing it. No alternate life to set beside this one for measurement. What I know is that the love I feel for Eli now, at 81 years old, sitting beside him on this porch as the sun goes down, is real, is deep, is the truest and most solid thing I have ever built with another human being, and I no longer feel any need to qualify it or diminish it simply because of how it began. A tree that grows crooked because of the way the wind first bent its young trunk can still, given enough years, given enough patient growth, become a strong and beautiful tree, dear. One that shelters birds and shades a whole yard and stands firm through storms that would topple a straighter but more brittle trunk. I have come to think of my own marriage that way. It grew crooked, from a wind I did not choose and could not resist, but it grew strong nonetheless, strong enough, in the end, to shelter an entire family that now numbers in the hundreds when you count every child and grandchild and great-grandchild. I think too, dear, about what I would say to Eli himself, if I could speak to him now, the way I am speaking to you. Though of course he knows most of this already, because we have talked about all of it, at various points across our 62 years together, in quiet late-night conversations that no one else was ever privy to. I would tell him what I have told him many times over the decades, that I am grateful, genuinely and completely grateful, that whatever our father's original intentions were, however little either of us was asked what we wanted, I ended up spending my life beside a man who chose, every single day for 62 years, to be gentle with me rather than harsh, to be patient with me rather than demanding, to hold my hand on an icy rooftop and in a hospital waiting room, and through the unbearable grief of burying our daughter, and to laugh with me. Still, even now, at 82 years old, over small foolish things, the way we did as children catching frogs by the creek, before either of us had any idea what our lives were about to become. I want to say something now about the word duty, because it is a word that has haunted this entire story. A word my father used to justify what he did to me. A word that our faith uses constantly, in ways both good and, I believe, sometimes twisted for convenience by those who hold power within our communities. My father told me, that terrible October evening, that love was not the foundation of a marriage, that duty was the foundation, and that love, if it came at all, would grow afterward from that foundation of duty. I resented that statement for most of my adult life, dear, because it felt, and still feels in many ways, like a justification for treating a daughter's heart as an afterthought, a mere hopeful byproduct of an arrangement made for entirely other reasons. And yet, I have come, in my old age, to a strange and complicated peace with a version of that idea, though not the version my father meant by it. I do not believe duty should ever replace a person's right to choose their own spouse freely, and I want that to be unmistakably clear. One final time, before I close this story, but I have come to believe that within a marriage, once it exists, whatever its beginning, duty and love are not actually opposites the way I once believed them to be. The daily, unglamorous choosing to show up for another person, to be patient with them on their worst days, to hold their hand through grief you did not ask for, to build a life together brick by brick, even when the first brick was laid without your consent. That daily choosing, which you might call duty, or you might simply call commitment, is, I have come to believe, one of the actual ingredients from which real, lasting love is built, in any marriage, arranged or freely chosen both. The difference, the crucial difference that I will insist on until my dying breath, is that this duty, this commitment, this daily choosing, must be offered freely by two people who have genuinely chosen each other, or at the very least, who have been given the genuine freedom to walk away from each other, in order for whatever grows from it to be real and not merely a survival mechanism dressed up in the language of virtue. Eli and I, robbed of that initial freedom, nonetheless found a way, slowly across years of shared hardship, to choose each other again and again until the choosing became, itself, a kind of freedom. A freedom earned rather than given. A freedom to love a man I did not originally choose because I came to know him so completely. Across 6 decades, that loving him became the truest expression of who I myself had become. I do not know if that makes sense to you, dear, sitting wherever you are sitting, watching this on whatever device you are holding. It has taken me 81 years to make sense of it myself, and I am still not entirely certain I have the words right, even now. Before I close this story, I want to speak for a moment about my daughter Fanny, because I do not want this story to end without her name spoken one more time. She would be 60 years old now, dear, if that terrible driver had not fallen asleep on that highway all those years ago. I think of her every single day. Still, even after 50 years, though the sharp edges of that grief have softened into something more like a constant, gentle ache rather than the unbearable, breath-stealing pain it once was. I think she would have liked this strange business of an old woman telling her life story to a device, to strangers scattered across the whole world. She was always curious, dear, always asking questions, always wanting to know more about the world beyond our fences than most of her siblings seemed to want to know. I like to imagine, in my more hopeful moments, that she is somewhere now where all her questions have finally been answered. I also want to say, before I close, that I have not told this story to my own community. Not in this way. Not with this level of honesty about the true nature of my marriage's beginning. Most of my children know, now, because I have grown old enough and perhaps brave enough, in these recent years, to tell them the fuller truth. Though I do not know if all of my grandchildren know yet, and I have no particular plan to sit each of them down individually to explain it. Our community, even now, even with all the changes I have described, still holds a strong instinct toward privacy regarding family matters, especially matters that might reflect poorly on a beloved and respected father and grandfather, my own father, whose memory is still held in high regard by many who knew him only as a devoted church member and a hard-working farmer, and who never knew the particular way he wielded his authority over his own daughter's life. I am telling this story now, to you, dear, to whoever is watching this from wherever you are in this wide world, because I believe there is a value in honesty that outweighs, at this point in my life, the value of protecting a reputation my father can no longer benefit from, anyway, being 45 years in his grave. I believe there are young women out there, right now, in Amish communities and Mennonite communities and countless other communities of every faith and culture around this earth, who are living through some version of what I lived through at 17 years old. And I believe, though I cannot know for certain, that hearing an old woman's honest account of what that experience actually felt like, and what became of a life shaped that way across 62 years, might offer something valuable to at least one of you, whoever and wherever you are. Perhaps it offers comfort if you are currently living through your own version of my 17-year-old grief, some small proof that a life can still hold beauty and love, even when its beginning was stolen from you. Perhaps it offers a warning if you are a parent considering some version of what my own father did, some small window into the decades of complicated pain that decision can cause, regardless of how it eventually turns out. Perhaps it simply offers you a story, dear, an old woman's long and winding story, and that alone, I have come to believe in my old age, is not nothing. Stories are how we carry each other's lives forward, after all. How we make sure that what happened to one person is not entirely lost to the silence that swallows up so much of human experience, generation after generation. Unless someone, somewhere, finally decides to speak it out loud. I mentioned earlier that I finally told my children the fuller truth of my marriage's beginning only in these recent years. And I want to tell you about that day, dear, because I think it matters to the shape of this whole story. It happened 3 years ago, at a family gathering to celebrate Eli's and my 59th wedding anniversary. A large gathering. Most of our children and a great many of our grandchildren crowded into Jonas's farmhouse. The very farmhouse Eli and I had once taken over as young marrieds ourselves. Someone, I believe it was my granddaughter Sadie, asked, in the innocent way young people ask questions at family gatherings, how Eli and I had first fallen in love, expecting, I think, the same sweet, simple story of a singing and a buggy ride home that most of the younger generation had always assumed was the truth of it. I looked at Eli across that crowded room, and he looked back at me. And something passed between us in that glance, 62 years of shared history, compressed into a single silent question. Should we tell them now? Eli gave me the smallest nod, the kind of nod that only a person who has shared your entire adult life would even recognize as a nod at all, and I set down my coffee cup. And I told them. I told them about the kitchen table, about my father's stern face and his careful words about duty and God's will, about the debt and the land and Uncle Jonas's failing farm, about the staged courtship and the letters I burned to Daniel, about the awkward wedding night and the long, hard years of learning to love a man I had not chosen. The room went very quiet, dear. Quieter than I had ever heard that farmhouse kitchen in all my decades of family gatherings there. And when I finished, my daughter Rebecca, who had always believed, as I told you, that her parents' marriage was a simple, natural love story, had tears running freely down her face, and she came and knelt beside my chair and put her head in my lap the way she used to do as a small girl, and she said, "Mama, I am so sorry. I never knew." I stroked her hair the way I had stroked it 1,000 times across her lifetime, and I told her what I will tell you now, dear. One final time before I close this story. I am not asking for pity, and I do not want my children or my grandchildren, or you, watching this, to carry my old grief as though it were your own burden to bear. I am simply asking to be known, fully and honestly, by the people I love, before whatever years remain to me run out. That is all any of us really want, I think, in the end. Not pity, not rescue, not anymore, not after 62 years. Simply to be known, truly, by the people who matter to us, and to know that our story, the real one, the whole one, will not disappear entirely when we ourselves finally do. My great-granddaughter, Catelyn, who was 9 years old at that gathering, sitting cross-legged on the floor near my feet through all of this, waited until the room had settled again, until the weeping and the quiet exclamations had passed, and then she looked up at me with the particular fearless curiosity that only a 9-year-old seems to possess, and she asked, "But do you love Grandpa Eli now, Grandma Ruth? For real? Not just because you have to." I want you to know, dear, that I have been asked many questions across 81 years of living, but very few of them have struck me quite as directly as that one did, asked so plainly, so without artifice, by a child too young yet to understand how complicated the answer to such a question could possibly be. I looked at Eli sitting across that room, 82 years old, his hands folded in his lap the way they had been folded that very first night at my father's kitchen table, though of course he had not been in that room, only I had. And yet I could not separate, even in that moment, the boy who would become that folded, handed old man from the frightened father who had first set this whole long story into motion. Yes, I told my great-granddaughter, and I meant it more completely than I have ever meant any word in my life. Yes, Catelyn, I love your Grandpa Eli for real. Not just because I had to, because across 60 years of hard work and heartbreak and joy, I came to know him, truly know him, all the way down. And there is nothing in this world I love more than what I found when I finally let myself look. 62 years, dear. 62 years since a stern man sat his 17-year-old daughter down at a kitchen table and told her, in a voice that allowed no argument, who she would marry and why, though the why was never spoken plainly, hidden instead behind careful words about God's will and family duty and the natural order of things. 62 years since a frightened girl lay awake through a long October night, thinking about running, and chose, in the end, to stay. Not out of courage exactly, and not out of weakness either, but out of something more complicated than either of those simple words can capture. A fierce, aching love for a family and a community she could not bear to lose entirely, even at the cost of her own choosing. 62 years since a stiff, awkward buggy ride down a cold winter road. Two cousins who had once caught frogs together as small children, now expected to perform a courtship neither of them had asked for, apologizing to each other in the dark for a decision that belonged to their fathers. 62 years since a wedding day in a barn full of nearly 400 guests, a girl in a blue dress that would one day be her burial dress too, kneeling before a bishop and promising, in a voice that did not sound entirely her own, to remain faithful until death. And here I am now, dear, 81 years old, sitting on a small porch as the sun goes down, beside a man whose hand I have held through icy rooftops and hospital waiting rooms, and the unbearable grief of burying our daughter. A man I did not choose, but who I have chosen, again and again, across 6 full decades, until the choosing itself became the truest kind of love I have ever known. 31 grandchildren, 47 great-grandchildren, with more on the way, an entire river of lives that flow, all of them. Back to that terrible night at my father's kitchen table, a night I would never wish upon any young woman, and yet a night that I cannot, in complete honesty, wish away either. Not when wishing it away would mean wishing away every single life that grew from what followed. I do not know what your own life looks like, dear, wherever you are watching this from. Perhaps you come from a community much like mine, where family duty and religious traditions still shape decisions that in other parts of the world would be considered entirely a young person's own to make. Perhaps your life has been entirely your own to choose, every step of it. And my story is, to you, simply a fascinating glimpse into a world very different from your own. Wherever you are, whoever you are, I want to leave you with this. However your life began, whatever choices were made for you before you were old enough or powerful enough to make them yourself, there remains, I believe, almost always, some measure of choice still available to you in how you meet the days that follow. Choose kindness where you can. Choose patience where you can. Choose to look, even in the most difficult, unchosen circumstances, for whatever good might still be built there, brick by brick, hardship by hardship, the way an old crooked tree still manages, given enough years, to grow tall and strong, and to shelter an entire yard full of lives that depend on it. That has been my life, dear 62 years of it. Now, beside a man I did not choose, in a marriage that began in grief and arrangement and quiet, unspoken debt. And that became, somewhere along the way, without either of us quite noticing the exact moment it happened, the truest and most solid love I have ever known. I think, too, about how strange it is that I am telling this story now, in this way, into a small glowing screen held by someone I will never meet, in a language of technology that did not exist when I was that frightened 17-year-old girl lying awake in the dark. My own grandchildren have helped me understand this strange new world, just enough to let me sit here and speak these words at all. And I confess there is something almost holy to me about it, dear. The idea that a story kept quiet for 62 years within the walls of one farmhouse kitchen might now travel to homes and hearts scattered clear around this earth, to people whose lives look nothing at all like mine, and yet who might still recognize, somewhere in this long telling, some small piece of their own struggle to make peace with a life that did not unfold the way they once hoped it would. That, I think, is the real gift of growing old enough to look back with clear eyes, dear. Not that the pain disappears, because it does not. Not entirely, not even after 62 years. But that you gain, finally, the distance and the courage needed to tell the truth of it, plainly, to whoever is willing to sit and listen. Before you go, dear, I want to ask you once more for those 3 small things. Because they truly do matter, more than you might realize to an old woman sitting here telling her story into a little glowing screen. If this story moved you even a little, please take just a moment to press that like button. It helps this video find its way to other hearts who might need to hear it. Please subscribe too, because I have many more stories to tell you. Stories from a long Amish life that has seen more change, and more heartbreak, and more quiet, hard-won joy than I ever could have imagined as that frightened 17-year-old girl at her father's kitchen table. And please, dear, before you go, leave me a comment down below and tell me where in this wide world you are watching from. I want to know how far these words have traveled, how many different corners of God's earth this old woman's voice has managed to reach. I will be reading every single comment, dear, every single one. And I thank you from the very bottom of my heart for sitting with me this long, for letting an old woman tell you the truth of her life, the whole truth, at long last, after 62 years of mostly keeping it to herself. God bless you, dear, wherever you are watching from, and thank you, truly, for listening to an old woman's story.